Hello, Kevin. You are up first, sir. How's it going?
Hey, how you doing, Bart?
Pretty good, Kevin. And where are you playing out of here, Kevin?
This is out of Revo Casino in Manchester, New Hampshire.
What is it called in Manchester, New Hampshire? What?
So it used to be Philotimo, like a
Oh, I've
Greek.
seen that. I've seen that on the. I've seen that on the Poker Atlas. But what did they rename? I've never been there.
They
I've seen it.
they they got bought out by like a big conglomerate, and now they're Revo Casino, like beginning of
Revo.
Revolution.
Revo Casino. And so are they doing any bigger games like some of these match to stack that I saw at the old Boston Billiards, and they're doing that at Chasers?
They have not taken poker seriously for the entire time. I've been living here my whole life, basically, and they don't really seem to listen to the players too much about like those type of game selections. So I'm not holding my breath, but I mean, there's no reason they can't. So hopefully at some point they will. I don't know.
So also too, they're building a casino across the street from Chasers in Salem, New Hampshire, where the old Rockingham Park, I think, is. I saw that in the Lawrence Eagle Tribune. So I mean, that would kill the action at Chasers if they do poker. But my only gripe about New Hampshire is it's been mostly PLO. They don't really have many hold'em games. So what's the size of the game that you're playing in? I'm talking about like at least at 2-5 and above. I mean.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and most of the time, like if there's a 2-5 or 5-10, it's like kind of curated in advance. But this particular game, I was looking on like a Saturday night at Atlas, saw 2-5 was randomly running.
It was a
So
two.
this is a two. Yeah, which anytime a 2-5 does run, yeah, at this casino, it's great. I mean, it's always a great game.
All right. So yeah, let's start us off here.
So this is 2-5 effect, 1800 effective,
Oh, 1800 effective. Okay. Yep.
and it's a 1500 cap. The villain in the hand is one of my really good friends, so that's going to kind of come into play here. And also, he's a winning player,
Okay.
so probably the only other for profit. So preflop +1 opens to 35.
Just a straight 35 with no straddle.
No straddle. I'm
Okay.
not sure if he thought there was a straddle, but I
Okay.
don't think he did.
Okay. So +1 to 35. Yep.
Yeah, Button, who's main villain, calls. I am in the small blind, and I 3-bet to 175 with black aces.
Ace of clubs, ace of spades. Okay. To 175 out of the small blind. So 35 call, and you're going, 4x plus the call. Okay.
And both of them call.
All right. So,
As the Button calls, he like looks at me, grins, and says, "Let's gamble." So I kind of am putting him on a somewhat wide range here.
well, I mean, it's a double flat, right? I mean, he did call. The guy from +1, was he 1800 effective too?
It's probably 14 or so, and villain covers
Okay.
me. He has like 2,500 in front of him.
The reason why I asked that is because, like, if +1 was like, say, started with like 800, and you think that the Button's a winning player, I mean, that should like sort of, you should be able to gather a lot from his pre-flop flatting range for 35 because he's not really deep enough to do anything with implied odds hands. But if the other guy started deep, I guess he's getting 20 times. I mean, still flatting I mean, I guess he's on the button, but this is a double flat. We know that. So, all right. So 175 is 525 to the flop, right?
Yep. Flop is 6 of spades, 5 of spades, 4 of diamonds.
All right. So flop is 6 of spades, 5 of spades, 4 of diamonds. Well, I mean, you wouldn't normally be like super concerned about this type of board, I wouldn't think, in what this configuration was, and I'll explain that. If +1 had opened and you had 3-bet and he had called, I wouldn't be scared of this board at all, right? From +1. Now, if Button opens and you 3-bet out of like the small blind and Button calls, you have to be much more cognizant of this board because Button, he has a continuing range. He's probably opening 35 to 40% of all hands that are open and then continues with a portion of that, which is probably over 50% depending on your sizing. But, this was a +1 open and you're 3-betting the +1. However, it seems like with this guy double flatting, it could sort of hit him a lot, like 5, 6 is 4. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I probably would treat this more like an LP open. With what your post-flop plan is, I would probably treat this as an LP open 3-bet defend as opposed to like a +1 open defend, if you follow what I'm saying here, in terms of the board texture,
Yeah, that makes sense. I, in the moment, was thinking that button is going to be putting a lot of pressure on me if I see bet this board. So I did check. The early position checks, and button makes it 325.
All right, so button bets 325. So you do check. You've got aces with the ace of spades. This is actually probably the absolute best overpair to check here. Hand that doesn't need protection. You have the ace of spades in your hand. You don't lose to value to the nut flush draws, and also you can call across many spade turns when you take a look at the value of certain overpairs. So I don't really hate the, I don't hate the flop check. The other thing that of note here too, just another subtle thing, is that when you have a 3 straight board, a smooth 3 straight board, hands that have draws will have more equity against you, as opposed to if it was like 6-5-3 or something like that. So you might want to play these types of boards cautiously, 6-7-8, some stuff like that, just because it's so easy for someone to be open-ended plus pair. Whereas it's not if there's a gap in the board, like I said, like, 9-7-6 or something, you know what I mean? Something like that. It's just easier. So, okay, so you check, and the button bet's 325. I mean, obviously, I think as played, you have to just call, right?
Yeah, and that's what I
Yeah.
do. And then +1 folds.
All right, so +1 folds. So now we put in 650, and now we're at 1175 according to my math here. We're at 1175. All right.
So that's what I've got too.
This is interesting because now you're in a situation here where you guys have what, maybe just about a pot size, like a pot size bet
Yeah.
left, something like that. Okay.
Turn is the 9 of hearts.
Turn is the 9 of hearts. So now the board is 6-5-4-9. That doesn't really change a whole lot here, right? I mean, it doesn't really change much of anything, actually. I mean, it's not, unless he's in there with like 9-6 or something like that. It's not an 8, which obviously one liner to a 7. It's not a 7 or 3. So, I mean, it doesn't appear to be a high brick, but I don't think it really changes anything.
Yeah, I mean 7-8 does come in, but it was already.
Well, 7-8 was already in, right?
Yeah. So I check and he jams pretty quickly.
Well, so hero checks and button jams. I mean, the only thing I would say about, before we get into what your actual, so he jams for 1300.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, before we get into your actual hand and scenario, and this actually might even be an MDF perspective spot, it's a little bit different here than if you were just heads up. Like, say, for example, you had basically done what I was talking about, or it was set up, well, I was talking about, it was like a button open, you 3-bet small blind, button called, and then you check this board and you check called, and now all of a sudden he jams. That would even be more of a snap call here than this one is. And I'm not saying I fold here, but and that's just because I think you have more ace high hands that check call on the flop in that scenario. If you were just heads up against the button here, if you had like ace king or ace queen with like no backdoors, you're going to fold the flop, right? Because of the guy behind you. You can't call, right? You can't call. So the only thing I'm saying here is that if this guy is aware, and the way this is setting up, you don't have those hands. So when you check call, you must have something. When you take a look at your 3-betting sort of 3-bet range, and then what do you call here multi-way? If you're folding out the ace high hands, then you are way skewed towards overpairs here, right? I mean, it has to be because of the +1. That's like a little subtle hand reading thing. Whereas heads up, you can have like ace king, ace queen, and he might just be just trying to plow you off of that, and it's a call all day. So it's really interesting because if I'm the button here and you call the bet, the 325, you really should have something here. Now, with that being said, if you want to go down the MDF route, what is your 3-bet range out of the small blind here in this configuration against a 7x open button call?
Yeah, I mean it's going to be pretty tight because the open to 35, just like, I mean, you can't be fooling around too much on that. I'm kind of putting him on a pretty strong range just by opening that way. Like, probably a lot of overpairs to the flop even he's going to have when he opens that size. So
it's just the way that this is kind of shaping up, as someone said, and I usually don't like to use these terms because I think people tend to misapply them at these levels. But when you're talking about, yeah, I mean, you have one of the best hands you can possibly have here. You're sort of at the top of your range, right? Here.
Right.
I mean, besides maybe 9-9.
Yeah, that's kind
If
of
you've,
where I ended up landing is
I mean, like I said, the only thing of concern here to me is the fact that it really looks like you have an overpair. And if he's a capable player, if I was on the button here, even if I had like a massive combo draw here, I don't know if I would. I don't know if I would jam here because it just looks like you always have an overpair. Now, with that being said, if I had a 15 out combo draw, I could play a little like, I think, you think, I think. For that reason, you would think, oh, I'm not jamming in this particular spot, right? But on paper, this is a call. It would be a pretty big exploit to fold out here in this particular spot. I think I would say as played. So again, I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that he's still jamming here, but wouldn't he want to get some value from some big hands or something like that? I mean, put it this way, if he's a good player, you should either be crushed here or he should probably have at least 30%. Now,
right. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, crushed like in the sense of like you might have like 5% or be drawing dead to a flop straight. If you take a look at the combos, if you had, even if it was half-half, which it probably isn't because there's probably less draws out there that are huge combo draws. But even if it was half-half and it was like 5% and say 70%, your overall equity would be like 37. I guess you would have a call there. But again, 3, 6, 9 combos of sets, another 4 combos of like maybe like a suited like 7, 8 variety. That's 12 of thick value hands. And how many like massive combo draws are there? It's probably more like 3 to 1, I would say, kind of like value. But even if it was like 2 to 1, you could say 5 plus 5 is 10 plus 70 divided by 3 gets you to like what, like 27. This is structured hand analysis. This is the way that like PokerStroke does it. At like 27% equity, and you need like more than 33 because he's making a pot-sized bet. So again, I think it's a pretty fairly large exploit here to fold, but it wouldn't surprise me though if you're crushed here.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I landed. I knew he would be capable of having some straights here. I didn't necessarily think he would jam with sets that often.
Okay, that stuff comes into play. Yeah.
I did call, and River rolls off offsuit 3, and he turns over 9-7 of spades.
Oh wow! So now, so he got there.
Yeah, he got there.
Yeah. So he actually picked up even more equity on the turn.
I mean, he had a monster hand. Yeah.
So I mean, he's got 15 outs on the flop, and then he picks up another 5 outs on the turn. So he's got 20 outs. I mean, you look at that, and I mean, in Hold'em, you don't get to that type of equity. Like at 44 unseen cards, I mean, he's like what, like 45% or something like that. I mean, that's a huge. I mean, did you think that looking back that you could have? I still think I go back to the whole +1 being in there. Why were you thinking that you should have folded?
Not necessarily. I thought it was kind of interesting because I had the ace of spades and blocked him having the nut flush draw. But I also, with him kind of saying like, let's gamble, I put him on a lot of like combo draws essentially. And, I did, even in my head, I was thinking like he could have 9-7 of spades here was one of the hands, I thought he could have.
I mean, one of the things that we washed over, I just want to bring up real quick before we move on. And I think you make an important point, is that people are not balanced necessarily in their turn sort of sizing here. I know probably on paper, maybe you could go to a solver and say that like all hands that are bet for him are jammed. But in reality, a lot of people will bet much less with value hands and a lot more with hands that want fold equity. And that comes into the equation too. That's what it kind of sounds like what you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I didn't think he would necessarily do this with a set. I thought he'd probably go more like 500 with a set and try to. I mean, because like you said, I think it's pretty obvious that I have an overpair, especially because I 3-bet, that opened to 35. The whole table kind of knew that guy was probably pretty strong when he did that. So, yeah, I thought it was an interesting spot, at least.
It is an interesting spot. And I will say, though, too, if you're ever in this spot from your opponent's perspective, you can actually do, I mean, you can make a bet like that that's like really big. I mean, I actually got owned one time about 15 years ago at the bike by a guy that used to play on Live at the Bike named Joel, the same type of thing, where like he raised the flop and I bet with aces, and then he made an over jam like on turn on a brick and I called off, but he had a set. So, you can make it look like you've got a big draw and you just know all the overpairs are calling off. But thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it.